Can we get these, yay, slides on the screen? Hi, my name is Owen Williams. I'm a software engineer at Grafana Labs, and I've been working with the Prometheus community for the past couple years on UTF-8 support in Prometheus 3.0. This is something that has been, I thank the previous speakers for teasing this in their talk, so now we get the big payoff. So I wanted to give some background about character support in Prometheus. This talk is mostly not technical because this is not an incredibly difficult, like the actual technical part of it is not as complicated as sort of the reasoning behind the change and the way we went about doing it. So the traditional allowed character set in Prometheus is this regex, which people may have seen in code in one place or the other. Letters, numbers, underscores, and colons. In Prometheus, the concept was to try to keep the metric names predictable and have a pretty strict set of standards for how they would be formed. So there's all these rules about it's got to be, these characters. The word should be like this. It should have a unit. It should have a suffix. And so the idea was to create this set of rules, and with this set of rules, you would avoid the problem of every team in your organization creating metrics with different naming schemes. While this is a great approach, it turns out to have not worked out in the long term because other observability systems did not choose the same set of constraints. So one of the things, Prometheus famously doesn't use dots, and then OpenTelemetry does, and many other systems do, Graphite, et cetera. And in fact, dots sort of started to gain favor as a way of doing hierarchical separation. And then this created problems with feature parity, first of all, so just familiarity. People come over to Prometheus if they're familiar with something else, and they might say, well, what do you mean I can't even use a dot? And then migrations. If you're trying to move from one system to another, having your metric names not be compatible is a big sticking point, and what do you do about that? And so thus began the groundswell of the people want dots. And can't we just start with this regex and just put a period in there and then call it a day? So let's do that. OK, great. Now we've added dots, and now we're done. Thank you very much. Not so simple. As the discussions began going on, there started to be questions about, is this the right thing to do? Do we want to do that? Maybe we could think bigger also. The main and first problem with adding dots as a valid character is this idea of preserving the dot as a future operator. There was this intent, and this is one of the reasons why it was specifically excluded from the beginning, was that the dot could be used you could have either a sum or aggregations of some sort. You could have operations on your metrics as part of the query. This may yet still be used for native histograms. It's still somewhat of an unknown, but it is a thing that the Prometheus community would like to preserve as an option. The second issue is that changing the character set is actually a humongous undertaking, not on the individual implementation level, but on the whole set of things that are compatible with that language. It is not just PromQL. There's also the exposition format, which looks similar but is not quite the same. Each implementation, there's the parsing version, which is reading in the text, but then there's the formatting version, which is creating it. There's the Prometheus exposition format. There's the OpenMetrics exposition format. There's the PromQL syntax. There's another implementation in Go. There's implementations in TypeScript for web validation. There's all of the language bindings. We are not, as far as we've done for the implementation so far, we don't have all of the languages updated, but we've already updated probably 8 or 9 different implementations to add UTF-8 support. So the conclusion, therefore, is we don't want to do this a lot. We want to do this as rarely as possible. Touching a language that's sort of this foundational to the ecosystem affects a lot of things. Let's do this once and not again. So if we're going to do a change like this, let's try to take advantage of the opportunity and kill some more birds with one stone. So yes, we want to preserve dot as a future operator, but this is also an opportunity to enable full compatibility with OpenTelemetry, which defines that UTF-8 is supported in metric and label names. I also think there is another sort of undersold advantage to allowing the full character set in metric names, and that's internationalization. There's a historical sort of assumption, that computing is sort of an English thing, and I think the community here proves that that's not the case. There's a lot of languages around the world, and the strict English alphabet is not enough to is woefully inadequate to the task. And allowing users to specify metric names in their own native language, whether it's just adding accents or using completely different character sets, even right to left languages, should absolutely be supported, and I think is a foundational part of making Prometheus a more open and accepting platform for everyone to use. So therefore, we decided, OK, let's add support for the full UTF-8 character set, which by definition includes the dots that people wanted when this whole discussion began. It also includes brackets, which is a hint to how implementation might get difficult, because the bracket is, of course, the character that defines the scope of the metric that you're querying. So we need a quoting syntax. It's not just enough to say all these characters are valid. We need to be able to parse this predictably. So if we're going to, and the goals for that syntax are, OK, we want to be able to support full UTF-8 in metric and label names. A quoting syntax will help us differentiate between the dot as operator and dot as character. If the dot is inside the quotes, then it's character. If it's outside, it's the operator, so that's preserved. And it avoids the issue of disallowed characters, which is, oh, you need to do special escaping for something that's fairly common. And then the next task is to come up with a syntax. And this quote of, "Oh no, I hate it," is from the Prometheus proposal that was merged last year. And it comes from any time you touch a thing that people are very familiar with, especially a language like PromQL. There's always going to be a bit of hesitation of something that changes, and is this if this is something I type every day, how many habits am I going to have to change? How much extra verbosity is this going to include? If the syntax is too awkward to use, then people coming from OpenTelemetry are going to bounce off of it. It's going to be too difficult, and you might as well just convert things to underscores to make your life easier. So we want to have something that is workable and easy. One common suggestion was just throw quotes around the metric name on the outside of the brackets. This was rejected for a few reasons, one of which is that quoted strings are valid Prometheus statements. So quote 5 returns a 5. This is not a very commonly used syntax, but it is valid. There is a subtlety that the bracket after the second quote is not technically valid, so the parser should fail there. But it adds a complexity that we did not really like. There's also the issue that just glossing over a string like this is not super easy to parse just visually. The brackets stuck in the middle there. There's a lot of quotes. We've lost the sort of idea that this is sort of a function-y style of display. So what did we actually do? So we decided, quoting label names is easy. We've already got quotes around label values. We can add them around label names. That seems fairly straightforward. The fundamental insight for the metric names. So metric names are just a special case of a label value, where the label name is _name _. So the fundamental change to the syntax is a quoted string without an operator assigns that string to name. So in the example 1, 2, 3, you could right now say name equals my dotted metric, and we're just saying you can drop the name part and say my dotted metric. And so the thing at the bottom is the new syntax. The style encourages that the operator list term should be the first term, but it's not required. You could put that at the end. I think it would be fair to write a linter that says, please don't do that. But implementation-wise, there's no need to enforce it to be the first term. The only real implementation enforcement is that you can't have multiple terms without an operator. Quotes in exposition format, those fall out pretty easily. We saw this in the first talk. You could just add quotes in the help line, in the type line, and again, it resembles PromQL fairly straightforwardly. And then the last place is in grouping terms. Also, you can add quotes there. We've also maintained the subtleties of open metrics quote characters are different than Prometheus text quote characters, but those are all consistent for the languages that we started with. So, quick demo. There will be a demo in 2 parts. This is the first part. Let's see if we can read this. It's a metric with dots in it. That's it. That's the demo. You can clap if you want. I mean, that's fine. And I think the reason why this is sort of a boring demo is because the backend, Prometheus itself and the TSDB have supported UTF-8 for strings for a long time. This is why the technical stuff is not so interesting. It's all a matter of validation and what the validation and the syntax of the language itself. Once you get into the back end, you remove the check that says, is this a valid name by the legacy character set, and you just remove that and you're done, and it just works. So yes, how do you enable this? So it's a bit of a misnomer because, as I say, it's just a matter of when metrics are checked to see if they're valid, what do you do? The way we've done this is a global flag in the common model library that asks what the validation scheme is for names. And by default in Prometheus 2.0, it's legacy. And you can switch that to say, OK, use the UTF-8 validation scheme. There's a reason that we did this at a sort of global library level instead of like on a per call basis. The way that the functions are set up, they're all purely functional. There's no way to pass state down that says which way do I want to validate this. There are places in the code where it's still helpful to ask if it's a legacy valid metric name, and so we provide a function for that. So if you're in UTF-8 mode, you can still say, by the way, is this valid under the old format or not? There's no way to do the opposite. You can't be in legacy mode and then say, is this valid UTF-8? And then there is an escaping scheme. So we know that there will be, no migration is smooth and knife edge. Some systems will be updated before others. It's very likely that a metrics producer is going to be UTF-8 capable talking to a system that is not capable of that. And so through content negotiation, the metrics producer can figure out that the consumer does not support UTF-8, and it will escape the metric names, metric and label names, to a legacy valid system. And again, here's a library flag where you can set what the default escaping scheme is. So by default, it'll be underscore replacement, but it does not need to be. Underscores are familiar and traditional and non-round trippable. You don't know what character it was to produce that underscore. It could have been a dot. It could have been something else completely. For that reason, we also provide 2 other methods of escaping. There's one called dots escaping, which at least tells you what the dots were, and then everything else just becomes an underscore. And that can be useful for systems like graphite, where dots are very heavily used, and that might be useful. But the other ones are less likely to be used. And then the last escaping scheme is value encoding, which is fully round trippable. We prepend a U underscore underscore, and then all the invalid characters become basically encoded with their Unicode code points. So dots become underscore 2E underscore. This provided what we thought was a decent balance between readability for characters that are regular English characters, so those will just be readable. You don't end up with like a whole base 64 encoded metric name. That's just a bunch of gobbledygook. You do have a bunch of new things that are kind of cluttering the display, but at least you can go round trip. So then there's the negotiation part. How do you decide, how do you know whether the system supports UTF-8 or not? It's in the accept header with a new term called escaping. If you say escaping equals allow UTF-8, then you're UTF-8 capable, and then the metrics producer will give you that new format. You can have a system ask for a specific type of escaping, and that will override the default of the producer. How often that's going to get used, I don't know. It seems much more likely that it will either be a new system that just does UTF-8 all the way through, or an old system that gets whatever escaping the producer decides upon. All right, this is the second half of the demo. So this is showing content negotiation. So as part of this copy of Avalanche I have running, so you can see we do a, hopefully is that readable? No, not at all. We are going to do a curl command, and we're asking for just, this is the regular header for a scrape. And what we get is a little hard to read, because we get things escaped to underscores, and it says, you know, you have your gauges, and it's basically just the traditional format that we're used to seeing. If we add that we allow UTF-8 in our escaping, then we get the quotes, and it moves inside the brackets, and it works straightforwardly. And so that's how you get the difference between at scrape time, the producers can do one or the other. Usage. In Prometheus 2, since version, I actually don't know exactly which one, we've had a feature called UTF-8 names. This will turn on this behavior. That turns Prometheus into UTF-8 mode globally, but it still defaults to legacy validation on all scrape endpoints. So if you also want it to allow UTF-8 metric names, you can set this global flag in your config to allow UTF-8. Or you can set it on a per scrape config basis. In Prometheus 3, it's default on. No need to add a flag. No need to set the scrape config any differently. For people with existing systems, if you upgrade to Prometheus 3, essentially all this means is that when at scrape time, your Prometheus will add this new term, the escaping term, to the accept header, and it will no longer return failure if a metric is submitted with previously legacy invalid characters. So that's the only situation that you might call breaking, which is if you were somehow relying on rejecting metric names of certain kinds, it will no longer do that. Otherwise, it's fairly transparent. It is still possible to override the validation scheme either on a global or scrape config basis, and the scrape config value will override the global value. So if you generally want legacy, but you have a few scrapes that can take UTF-8, you can do that combination. There's still quite a bit to do. The beta that was released this morning has the Go support that you would expect. We're still working on bindings for the other official language bindings, so Java, Python, Ruby, Rust. Java and Python, we have decent progress on. Ruby and Rust, we are looking for contributors and volunteers to help implement those. We have work in progress for the push gateway. We're going to use, because the metric and label names have to be passed through the URL, so we have to do escaping there. And then there's discussions with the wider community of making sure that this new syntax can be adopted everywhere. One of the things that I think we like about the syntax is that the implementation is fairly straightforward. It is a conditional on things in the brackets, whether they have an operator or not. And so we feel that this is something that is reasonable to implement in other systems without too much of a headache. The other thing we're working on is, we were talking this morning about open telemetry to Prometheus, and how right now there's a library and a set of policies about how names will be converted when going from open telemetry to Prometheus. The idea is that we're probably going to make that more featureful and configurable so that people can keep the conversion from OpenTelemetry to Prometheus as it is now. So there's the syntactical change of the character set, and then there's the logical change of appending the suffixes. So we're going to keep that as an option, or you can just pass through the names as is without any change, or maybe a combination. It depends what people find most useful and what sort of is most comfortable for people to use. That's it. That is UTF-8 and Prometheus 3. Questions?
All right. On? OK. I might have a first question.
Yeah.
Did you look a lot at the performance aspect when you render it out again? I'm currently thinking about the UI. I don't do anything with it in the UI. But let's say I have a table, 10,000 time series, bunch of labels. And now before I render out the metric names and labels, I kind of have to go through all the bytes and check, is there anything special in there? Do I need to put quotes around it? And that might take some extra time and code complexity. Do you have that on the Go side for any serialization and so on as well?
Yeah, we haven't looked at that yet. In general, the check for is something a legacy metric name is a pretty straightforward, linear, is this character outside of the range? If so, whoop, all right, escape to something else. But we haven't done a lot of performance analysis. I don't foresee
I guess
anything.
Just people have to be careful whenever they render out a label name or a metric name, first check what characters are inside. You can't render it anymore as you did earlier.
Yes, it's true that people will make bad metric names, and either through just a ridiculous set of choices that maybe we wouldn't make, or there is also an implication from a rendering perspective.
I just mean that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now you have to always check all the bytes. You have to think about doing that, so that's important for me to understand as well.
There is a check for UTF-8 validity, which is its own subset of Unicode. So at least there won't be any of those illegal characters. But yeah, if somebody does, lots of combining characters that make Zagul stuff, that is something to check for.
Yeah, I mean just whether I have to put quotes around it or not in the rendering. Let's say I show the table of 1 million metric names, I have to check them, right? And put quotes around the ones that do have UTF-8 special characters that weren't allowed before, but are allowed now.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the display is.
Yeah. Let's go here.
So thank you for the talk. You just mentioned that probably people is going to creating a lot of bad metric names, for sure. Why not some emojis? I was thinking about if you see in the future, community bring up projects to have a set of links on the metric names. something like that, you know.
A set of links?
Oh, links, I mean, like validations to avoid
links,
like,
yeah.
bad names.
And I think there's sort of a discussion to be had because, again, the Prometheus way was this very strict set of, like, this is how you shall create metric names, and now that's a little bit more up in the air. And whether, if we're coming from OpenTelemetry, then they have their own, recommendations for how metric names will be produced. At the end of the day, I personally am a little more on the side of if people want to make bad choices, that's sort of their own problem. But also from a community standpoint, yeah, I think a linter, again, is, yeah, the way to go for most of these things. To say that, like, this is not a great idea, maybe don't do that. But I would want a very compelling reason to enforce that at the code library level.
I see. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for the talk.
Yep. Where am I looking?
Back here.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hello.
Is there anything to keep in mind with relabel rules, or those will work as is, I guess, with like dots?
I am not sure.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. And then my other question is with the last talk and the resource attributes.
Yeah.
Is there like will that just like natively work depending on like the configuration?
So far, the implementation that has happened is basically around just what is coming into Prometheus. And so it is, as I say, it's basically around the steps of validation. As we looked in the code base, there was no place in the code that assumed this smaller character set. Everywhere it was full strings, the TSDB everywhere. We had no trouble with round tripping or anything. So in general, I would not anticipate any place where there is an extra restriction to this set of characters for a technical reason. So I think any code that's sending data to Prometheus, it will just sort of work as expected. But this is one reason why we have to start testing these things, is because there's a lot of different places where the code was changed and a lot of different code paths down to down to the TSDB. So it's you're never quite sure you have all the edge cases covered.
Yep. Cool, thanks.
Thanks for your presentation. My question is that Prometheus already supports label name for metric name, which is _name, _.
Yeah.
Why you decided to do not use this format for metric name escaping, and instead you decided to just put this metric name in quotes after curly braces?
Yeah, mostly to reduce typing, to make it more easy to write it out. I think that enforcing adding __ name equals would sort of become repetitive, and that's a lot of bytes that you're sending, like over scrapes and things that would be redundant. The name. It's hard to talk about the name thing with the underscores. That keyword is still useful if you want to do queries, say, with a regex on the name, on the metric name. But for the purpose of scraping and then also querying, we felt that we wanted something that was more terse. And we thought that the simple rule of just saying, OK, if there's no operator, then it is the metric name, was sort of straightforward and fairly intuitive, and results in queries that I think look pretty straightforward.
Sorry. I'm wondering, if you decide to switch to the new names, you will probably have some time when some applications already have used the new names,
yep.
Some use the old names and so forth. Is there like a migration path so that you can store the new names already, but when you query, it just catches all?
Yes, this is the mixed block scenario, which we've done a lot of thinking about, and we have the proposal in Prometheus, and we've started implementation work on it. the design proposal is that if when we receive a query for a metric that is the new metric name, there will be a way of basically, I should have looked this up this morning, but there will be a way of knowing if the block on disk you're looking at might have old names and new names mixed together. Sometime that could be either with a date range or a flag in the TSDB metadata. I forget which way we ended up going, but essentially what will happen is on the query path, we explode the query into, okay, look for the UTF-8 version, but then also look for the escaped version, and then we combine those results together and return them. So the goal is that you can basically have a configuration that says, okay, here, all of this was legacy, all of this is new, and then in the middle, and especially with compaction, you could end up with definitely both metric names in the same TSDB. So you have to look for both and then combine them together. There's still a lot more work to do there to make sure that's efficient and fast, but that's the approach we're planning to take.
Make it quick.
Oh, damn. Okay. You can query metrics by metric name if you use the double score name, and you can use regex matchers to do that. Regex also use dots and brackets as operators. How do you escape the regex characters inside the already escaped metric name?
Essentially, we use the Go wherever there's any confusion about things. So for instance, there's also other characters that you don't want to put in quotes, and you can use Go escaping for those. What I would say is, however Go does it, that you would define a regex for those characters is how we would do it, probably with the \U format.
Just /dot should be fine.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool. That was pretty quick for regex question. Thank you, Owen. Here's your speaker gift.
Oh, thank you.
If there are more questions, you know who to talk to. I guess you're around still.
Yes, I'll be around.
Perfect. All right.
All right.
We're straight going into the next one.
Thank you.